So good afternoon again, everybody. Welcome back from the various breakout rooms, and we're back to end our particular conference with a Q&A session together. I hope you enjoyed the various sessions. I hear there's some very interesting feedback, points that even if we can't deal with them today, we're going to be able to take on. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions there. So I'm very pleased that we can end with a question and answer session. And I'm also very pleased that not only is Dean Beale joining us again, but two members of his senior team, Alec Pybus, who is our Chief Operating Officer, and Angela Crossley, who is our Director of Strategy and Change. And they're going to be in the firing line for the questions in terms of this particular session. Of course, as many of you know, we have others in the senior leadership team, but we thought the way we are doing this particular conference, it would be good just to have three members present. Now, do feel free, if you wish to ask any questions live, to pop them in the chat box, and I'll have a look at the Q&A box and I'll have a look at them, and time permitting, we will deal with questions that come in to our Q&A box. We did ask for questions in advance, and I'm very pleased to say that we've had some. So I thought, just whilst you're relaxing and thinking, if you want to take part, we'd start with the questions that have been sent in advance. We'll split them between the guys, and the first one has come in, which I'll publish now, so hopefully you can all see it. It's published, and Philip Long has asked this one. Philip, an IP from many years, who's now a consultant. He's asked, where are we up to with the consultation on IP regulation, please? Probably one for you, Angela, isn't it, as Director of Strategy and Change? So the IP regulation, please, Angela.
Thanks, Steve. So you'll know that we've been reviewing the regulatory framework as it relates to insolvency practitioners. And as part of that, we issued a call for evidence last year. We received a good range of responses and have been in the process of analysing those. Unfortunately, the work on that had to pause for a period over the summer just because the team working on it got deployed to work on the emergency COVID work the agency was doing, particularly the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act. There's been a lot of fallout work from that also. It wasn't a case of getting royal assent and skipping off to the next thing, and the team have been quite heavily engaged on it. They've picked up the work again now, though, and are working at pace to get us in a position to be able to publish the government response as soon as possible. We know that there's been a bit of a gap between the call for evidence and the government response, and that's inevitably going to cause a little bit of disquiet. But I just want to affirm that we are working on it and want to publish it as soon as possible. And government really does value the work of insolvency practitioners and the insolvency profession at the moment, particularly with all the COVID stuff going on. So it's a case of watch this space, and there'll be something published soon.
Lovely, thanks, Angela. I'm sure people will be watching this space very interestingly. Of course, regulation is a theme across government at the moment, so thanks for that. There's one or two new questions coming in, which is great, and I'll try to monitor those and feed those in, a bit of a theme. But I'm just going to publish now a question that we've had from Peter Bailey. In fact, a couple of questions, so two parts really, probably for Dean, I think. So I'll take the first part. Peter from Sweeton Maxwell, who always supports us, asks, when will we see permanent amendments to the Insolvency England and Wales 2016 rules, which will support the amendments that we've sort of filtered into the Insolvency Act by the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act? So I suppose it's those rules being made permanent. Dean, do you want to take that one for us?
Yeah, happy to, Steve. Thank you, Peter, for the question. I think you'll appreciate that the delivery of the primary legislation for the SIGA was done at pace. and inevitably one of the areas where we would have preferred to have delivered a full complete set of legislation is in the supporting secondary legislation. The current temporary provisions are there until the end of March, but we have been working really hard since Royal Assent to the Act to get the rules up and ready. And we've just started the process with the Insolvency Rules Committee, the Committee of the Great and the Good, who are currently sort of reviewing the draft rules. And the expectation is that early in the new year, before the expiration of the temporary rules, we will have those rules in place. Just to note that we require separate rules for Scotland. And since this is an area of mixed responsibility, the timing of those rules will be subject to further discussions, working closely with colleagues from the Accountant in Bankruptcy and further discussions with the Scottish Government.
Thanks, Dean. And I think Peter's secondary point is probably a one that many of us have asked, having lived with the Insolvency Act amendments over many years. And so Peter asks, is there likely at any stage to be some consolidation of this 86 Act? He describes it as a patchwork of amendments over 30 years. Have you got any money, Dean?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with Peter. It is a difficult set of legislation to work with because of the extent of amendments that have been made. Honestly, it is not a priority for us at the moment to progress a big exercise, and it would be a big exercise to recast the Insolvency Act. It's definitely on our, would like to do when the opportunity arises. But at the moment, every opportunity we have to legislate, we've got, really pressing, important reforms to introduce. So it's not a priority for us at the moment. And what I would say is that, I think our lives are a little easier now, and a lot of that due to Peter and other colleagues who work in publishing in terms of providing us with the resources that help us navigate this patchwork of legislation, and online resources have transformed the way we can sort of access the information tremendously. So I'd say probably not as important now as it may have been 10 years ago to do that recast exercise, but still very much on our wish list for the future. But I can't see it happening anytime soon.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks, Peter. Quite a few questions coming in around personal insolvency, so I might try and weave those in. But Alec, we had one earlier from Mike, another friend of mine who I know well, Mike Sargent, who's saying there is concern that next year will be more people in serious financial difficulty. And basically, Mike asked, should we effectively give consideration to perhaps saying those who want to go bankrupt just pay half the fee and then the balance by monthly instalments, rather than this quite substantial payment that has to be made up front before you can make yourself bankrupt? Alec, do you want to look at that one for us?
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve, and thanks, Mike, for the question. There are no immediate plans to review the bankruptcy application or DRO fee. The government is conscious of the impact of the pandemic on households' finances, and will continue to monitor the situation in the round. Assistance is already available for people who may not be able to afford the fee in the form of instalments prior to the bankruptcy order or the debt relief order. In addition, some charities offer a contribution or help with paying the fee. The government has put in place an unprecedented package of support to help people with their finances during the pandemic, as we're aware, including payment holidays, making changes to universal credit system and supporting those who rent their homes. The government is committed to helping people access the support they need to get their finances back on track. In fact, an extra £37.8 million worth of support package has been made available to the debt advice providers, bringing the budget for free debt advice this year in England to over £100 million.
That's really helpful, Alec. And I've got another question from Mike, but I'm going to take one that's just come in from Meg now. And I don't know whether that you or Dean want to answer this. It's on the same theme, and you've answered the point about reducing fees. But Meg's asked, any consideration to review the DRO debt limit? Dean, is this one for you, maybe, or not? I don't know.
It's some. Thanks, Steve. It's some. There's no plans at the moment, but it is something that we keep under review, and we are reviewing it at the moment. In light of the pandemic. But there's no plans at the moment to change that. But it is one of those areas that we will from time to time, as we did a few years ago, look to see if it's necessary to flex those limits. Yeah, it's something that we keep under close review.
Thanks, Dean. Alec, back to you, because I know you've been very involved in our estate strategy and, of course, our work that we've been doing under having the offices open, and you've done a sterling job in respect to that. So going back to Mike's second question that he asked, he's obviously aware of all the changes that we've had to face, and he's wondering whether it's affected our work in terms of interviewing bankrupts and directors. And then I guess he asked a supplementary to that, if it hasn't, do we need all these offices around the country? So, Alec, do you want to just think about that one for us?
Yeah. Good question again, Mike and Steve. Thanks for your generous appraisal of my efforts for work on our estates to date. But in answer to the question about, I think the official receiver teams have, as you probably heard if you joined the plenary session earlier, have continued to interview throughout the pandemic using alternative methods such as video interviewing and telephone interviews. And face-to-face interviewing will still be needed in some cases where the interviewee would maybe prefer to be interviewed in person and in an office. And I think we still need to provide that. As you've said earlier, and Dean sort of trailblazed for us, over the past 3 years, we have already significantly reduced our estate footprint, focusing our efforts on our two most expensive sites, Birmingham, where we reduced our footprint by over 50%. And last November, we successfully relocated our London headquarters from Westminster to a smaller, cheaper and more modern facility in Stratford in East London. Building on that, we continue currently updating our estate strategy. We're looking at ways to transform our estate to be more efficient, more flexible and sustainable, aligning that with the wider civil service reform and modernisation agenda. And of course, it will also crucially look at how this period of home working has helped work for our people as well as for the services that we provide. So that definitely will be factored in, and we're hoping to be bringing a proposition to our main insolvency board in the new year on our emerging thoughts and strategy in respect of our estate.
Thanks, Alec. That's really helpful. We've had a number of questions, because I'm obviously trying to monitor them at the same time, come in around bankruptcy fees, debt relief limits. So I know Dean has given us a general overview, but it's nice to see that a theme's come in. And as I said, we will pick some of these up afterwards, and certainly this feedback is really useful for us. I'm going to move to a second theme now, and we've had two questions in on this, one from Mike Mulligan and one that's just come in anonymous. It's something that I know has hit the headlines over the last few months. I know, Dean, you've had to become involved with Treasury discussions around this. It's the great Crown preference in insolvency debate. So Mike asked, is it really necessary? And then anonymously, is it definitely going ahead on the 1st of December? So Dean, where are we at?
Thanks, Steve. I'll say thanks. I don't know whether it is a tough one, and we are acutely aware of the concerns in the industry about the measure. But government's been clear that this is about sort of maximising, the tax take for government, and with the levels of public spending at the moment, it's vital that government continues to do that. Also recognising that it's not quite you know, going back to sort of pre-Enterprise Act Crown preference, we're only talking about the taxes that are deducted by firms. So the taxes that are deducted from employees and customers, VAT, PAYE, student loan deductions, employee NIC, and CIS, construction industry scheme deductions. So, you know, government sees this as being really important to raise money for vital public services. But, you know, I'm aware that there's you know, a strong feeling in the sector that this is not a helpful move for the insolvency industry, and many of you and many organisations in the sector have been lobbying against it. But as we sit here today, it is still happening. It's been delayed once already from April to the 1st of December. And as far as I'm aware, you know, it will be implemented on the 1st of December, and you know, we've all had quite a while now to prepare for this change coming in.
Thanks, Dean. I'm trying to sort of get a few themes going here. I'm going to pop along now to another area that, of course, many have been very interested in over the years, and that's pre-pack reforms. We, of course, published the draft regulations recently. Angela, I know you've been very involved in that. There's a question just come in asking about the expected timing for these reforms, and I've been a bit naughty, Angela. I've popped another one in for you. Just somebody's come back to you on the IP regulation. Can you be more precise on the timings? You said soon. I don't know if you want to take that one, or you're going to stick to your soon and then have a word about pre-packs. Angela, I'll put you in the firing line. Sorry. Oh, you're on mute, Angela. Which might have been deliberate, Angela, I don't know.
It was deliberate. So turning to the timing point first, obviously any government response has to get, ministers have to be happy with whatever proposals are put forward, and it will be ministers that decide. And so no, I can't be more precise than I have been already, because we'll be putting our response to ministers very soon, but we'll no doubt have to have discussions with them and make sure that they're confident with whatever the government response is going to be. So I'm afraid no further detail on the timing, other than to say we will be putting it to ministers and we'll publish in due course. Now, there was a question about pre-packs, Steve, but my sound was going a bit like a Dalek, I'm afraid. So could you repeat it?
Yes, of course. It was a general question, really, on the expected timing for the pre-pack reform. So again,
right.
Over to you.
Yes. Okay. So we know that the power that we've got expires in June. As you mentioned, we've published some draft regulations. We've received a good raft of responses to those that the team are now looking at. They'll publish the final version of the regulations with a view to bringing them in before the power expires in June. And the same applies. You know, the timetable will be dictated by ministers and parliamentary availability, but the end point would be before the power expires back in June 2021.
Great, thanks. And obviously the draft regulations have promoted quite a lot of general discussion around them. I presume you'd be very interested in feedback, wouldn't you? Generally, because obviously they're only draft.
Yes. Exactly. We've had a good range of responses to the regulations that we published, but it's not too late if anyone's got a particularly strong view to get in touch with the team. You can do that either through me, or I'm sure there's some contact details on the website, and the team is keen to engage with stakeholders to make sure that we get the regulations in as good a shape as possible before they become permanent. So yes, if you've got some strong views, please do get in touch.
Lovely. Thanks very much. I've just published another question here to try and take another theme. Now, Alec, I know you've obviously very involved as operational in terms of our disqualification work that you do, but I think possibly, I mean, do chip in, but I'll start with Dean on this. So the question here is asked, you know, we've had the Company Director Disqualification Acts since 1986. Any proposals to change that? Of course, we had compensation orders recently, didn't we, Dean?
Yeah, so So we have made changes since 86, compensation orders being one of them. And we also revised the sort of matters determining unfitness. For those of you that were in the session, the workshop with Tom Phillips, Tom and I worked on that when we were in policy together a few years ago. At the moment, there's no plans to make further changes to the CDDA. We did publish in August 2018 a package of insolvency reforms that the government said it would bring forward when parliamentary time allows. Some of those reforms we have brought them forward in the SIGA Act. Some of them we have not yet brought forward. So we still have other proposals that government has said it will introduce in due course, and we will be looking at those. But in terms of any other changes to the CDDA or insolvency regime, generally, no plans at this time. But we keep it under review regularly, and look at emerging case law around the CDDA to see if there's any issues with it. Thank you,
and I'll just leave Jennifer Marshall's question up as a comment. Thank you, Jennifer, and obviously for today, you make the point effectively, and we can all see that now. Personal liability for directors. It's a tough time to be a director. I think we do recognise that, but I guess our trick is to make sure that it's those who cross that line are actually penalised, and we go after those, isn't it? One for you, Alec, perhaps. Can I just ask you, question here from Jane, who's very grateful to the Breathing Space presentation, and she's just wondering if we're going to be rolling out such presentations on a wider level so people will understand it. Perhaps, Alec, you can just update us on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's a good question, and I attended that plenary session, and the questions coming in were tremendous and really good. So it's good to get the feedback. It was well received, and I definitely will be passing that on to the team. They have a number of monthly engagements on a technical and non-technical level with money advisors, creditors and others, interested parties such as local government. And if they feel that that presentation would be worth rolling out at one of those monthly events, we'll definitely be taking that on board and doing it. It's actually good to see it. You will know, Steve, that when we gave the demo of the portal to a recent board meeting, that was well received. People can visualise what it is we're setting up, and it goes down well. But the feedback's good. Thanks very much.
Very, very helpful. And there have been several questions around that as well. Yeah. Thank you. So it's great. Questions still coming in. I hope I'm getting good balance to them. David Kerr, of course, many of us know, thanks David, is asking us, do you envisage moving towards a single gateway for access to all individual insolvency processes? Dean, any thoughts around that maybe? I don't know.
We've got no plans at this time, but I hate to keep repeating myself. We keep this stuff under constant review, I mean, in that space, the next big thing will be the introduction of breathing space.
Yeah.
It's not going to be mandatory that you have to go through a breathing space to access. I'm repeating one of the Q&As that was in that session earlier, which Sam Roberts and the policy team answered. But it's not mandatory that you have to go through a breathing space to access any of the current formal debt solutions, or indeed any of the informal ones, such as a debt management plan. So that's the next big change for us in that area. And I think there will be definitely some benefits for those who do go through breathing space and have that independent debt advice from a suitably qualified and regulated person. And one of the things that we need to ensure as far as possible is that people do end up in the right solution that's going to sort out their problems, give them the fresh start, give them the debt relief, facilitate a debt compromise where that's applicable. So I think breathing space will be a really important addition to the current sort of personal insolvency and debt management space. So we'll get that underway from next May, and see how we get on with that.
Thank you. So we've got about 5 minutes, and hopefully I can keep bringing some themes in. There's been 3 or 4 questions, and I've just picked a couple of them around the temporary extensions to the temporary measures, if I can call that, in SIGA. As all of us know, or a number of us know, of course, we extended a number of those to either December and then other ones to March. Are we going to do any further extensions? Angela, is this you or Dean? I don't know. Angela?
Let Angela go.
Yeah. You're on mute, Angela.
I did press my non-mute button that time, Steve. So with the temporary measures under the SIGA, they are extendable in up to certain periods of months, and the latest one is up to the 31st of December, as you've mentioned. So as with everything else, government keeps these things under constant review, particularly with the COVID type response, where things are very much a moving feast, and from one week to the next we don't quite know where the nation's going to be. So at the appropriate time, decision will be made as to whether those measures need to be extended beyond the 31st of December.
Lovely, thank you. We haven't talked much about Brexit in this Q&A. I think perhaps we'd be remiss if we didn't cover it off. Question that's just come in here, probably you, Dean, I think, because I know you've been very involved in this. Effectively, are we actively considering implementing the new neutral model law on insolvency-related judgments? And of course, we know that that's something that we've utilised and looked at before. So where are we at with this, Dean?
Thanks. So this was a project at UNCITRAL that the UK was heavily involved in, and we worked for a few years, both insolvency service colleagues and colleagues from BEIS on contributing to the development of that model law. I've spoken to a few experts in the UK industry, had some mixed feedback on the model law itself, but I think subject to sort of our priorities, I would hope that we'll be able to do some consultation on whether it is the right thing to do to adopt it at some point in the next 12 months, and then following that, be able to advise government as to whether it's going to be, a positive change for the a positive addition to the current UK insolvency regime. So no plans at the moment to adopt it, but I'm keen that we look to do some consultation when we can. Thank you.
I've just got, I think, time for 2 other questions that I've published. One has been something that obviously has been very much considered, and in the light of breathing space, it will be interesting to see how things change. It's a question around IVAs, and I know you've looked at this from the regulatory side of things, Angela. Should we be looking at a review of IVA use is the question. Are we concerned about best advice?
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, there's been an awful lot of regulatory activity in the IVA space, and the RPBs and the Insolvency Service have worked with others to try and address some of the misconduct that I know particularly advisors are concerned about in relation to the giving of poor advice at the front end, which I think is what the question is probably aimed at. And we've made some changes to the regulatory requirements. RPBs, when they monitor now, have to look at whether or not the advice has been received from a regulated debt advisor. We're working with the Advertising Standards Authority and the FCA over what happens at the front end. So there's an awful lot going on in that space. And in answer to the question, is it right that they should be reviewed? I think I would go back to what Dean says, which is that overall we keep all these things under review. IVAs at the moment are the protocol has been adopted to cater for COVID. There are payment holidays on offer and payment reductions for people that have been impacted. We've got breathing space coming in May. Probably now is not quite the right time to undertake any review. If there was going to be a review, I don't think now would be probably the right time, but we are alive to ongoing issues in that market, and we've been taking steps to address them across government.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, and of course, IPs are regulated, of course, aren't they? And that, thank you. Last question. Perhaps I'll give the last word, if that's all right, to Dean. It's a question around one's coming at the end on pre-packs. I know we talked about that. The question from Helen Coverdale is whether or not the pre-pack pool will still exist, or is it effectively going to be retired with the new reforms? Well, they're only draft, of course, but we talk of an evaluator, don't we, Dean, in there? Pre-pack pool still part of our thoughts?
I think the pre-pack pool, could play a really important role in being, one of those evaluators that people use. So, its future will depend very much on the uptake of the pre-pack pool opinion. I think where it's probably got a bit of a head start is that it's set up, the people have been recruited, and they have experience in delivering the sort of opinions that are envisaged in the regulations that have been published. So I hope that the reforms will have a positive impact on pre-packs, and the whole aim around the reforms from the time of the Theresa Graham report was around improving creditor confidence in the process, that creditors can be confident that in a situation where a business is pre-packed and they get told about it after the event, that the best outcome was achieved in the circumstances. And I think the independent opinion is a really valuable part of that, giving that confidence, providing that confidence. So that's where we are.
Yep, that's really helpful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've just gone past our half hour. I hope I've managed to bring some of the themes out. I know we had some questions we haven't been able to answer. I've tried to move those in. We will look at the questions that remain and certainly take the feedback that comes from them and points on board. And if there are specific issues, there's been quite a lot, Alec, around breathing space as a theme. So we can pick that up, I'm sure, because there's very much a discussion around that. But I'd like to thank Dean and Angela and Alec for being available for our virtual question and answer. I'd obviously like to thank all you guys who've made it very interesting, because the questions have kept rolling in, which is great actually, and how it should be. And obviously, if there are any of these themes that you feel you want to pursue further, then of course our contact details, and Angela said she'll be very happy to welcome further feedback. So it's time to draw, as I said, the Q&A to a close, and also very soon to draw the conference to a close. I'll hand over to Dean in a minute to let him have the final word. But perhaps I can just say my thanks to everyone on my behalf and behalf of the board, which I'm privileged to chair. This event is a really important one for us. Because it shows the breadth of our stakeholders that we've got, and we do value contributions from them all. And collaboration is something that we certainly tried to stress in recent years, something that's very close to my heart. Dean kindly said in his opening speech that I would be stepping down in the spring after more than 5 years at the helm as chair, and that is indeed the case. And I do step down with a great deal of sadness, because it's a job that I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed and loved, but also I hope that I'll be able to leave in a few months' time with great pride, and I believe I can, because over the last 5 years, my respect for the Insolvency Service staff at all levels has become absolutely huge, and I've really valued what each and every one of them did. Shortly before COVID started, I was leaving Stratford, our new premises, which Alec was very instrumental in getting us together. And I stood in the lift to go down to the ground floor with a gentleman from the Insolvency Service, and he was pushing ahead of trolleys, taking papers around. And I said, "Oh, you know, where are you going?" And he said, "You're Mr. Allinson, aren't you?" And I said, "That's right." He said, I'm the person who posts your board papers to you from the post room. So I know your address," he said, as I post them. And I thought it was fantastic that I could sit and chat to him. And he was obviously very proud at his part that he was playing, because he was posting out the board papers. And I think that's really typical of the way the service at all levels has people who are there wanting to do the right thing for public service. And that is fantastic. And we've seen that particularly this year, I think, and the way that the whole staff have adapted to the changes has been fantastic. Now, many of you will have also heard, and Dean has said, and I've said as well publicly, that we're in the midst of formulating our next 5-year strategy, and it's my earnest wish that we'll be able to bring that to fruition. So as in part of my legacy when I move on. It's an exciting strategy, one that the whole of the board have been involved in, and soon we'll be disseminating that through to all our stakeholders, our staff and everyone. But at the core of that strategy will remain the fact that we will want to restore and maintain economic confidence. We want to protect creditors, and we'll also, of course, want to deal with wrongdoing. And the Insolvency Service has a crucial role to play in this country in those areas. And as I said, I'm very proud of what it's done this year and the years before. So thank you very much from me for attending today. We will welcome the feedback, but let me hand over quite rightly with the final words to Dean, our Chief Executive. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for those kind words. And thank you for being such an expert host today as well. It's all gone very smoothly. I'd also like to close by just thanking the people who have pulled all this together behind the scenes. So Rachel Walton-Trow and our stakeholder engagement team, and to Ray Allen and his colleagues from Simity Communications, who have provided the technical support to run today's virtual event. Thank you very much. It's gone brilliantly. And a thank you also to all the presenters, to Jennifer Marshall for her excellent analysis of the SIGA reforms, and to all my Insolvency Service colleagues who've contributed to the breakout sessions today. I managed to dip into all 6 of them and typically learn something that I didn't know in each of them, and that's always a good indicator of quality content. I'd also like to thank everyone who submitted questions, both to the breakout sessions and to the Q&A panel we've just had. Thank you for your engagement and some really excellent questions. So finally, it's normally convention that I wish you all a safe journey home. I suspect for many of you that will just be a short walk to the kitchen to pop the kettle on. But anyway, thank you very much for attending today. I wish you all well and keep safe. And I look forward to seeing you again in 2021, hopefully in person. But many thanks and goodbye.